Ever crack open your computer and feel like you're staring into some kind of alien landscape? Well, buckle up, because today we're taking a deep dive into the heart of it all, the motherboard. We're talking schematics, chips, connectors, the whole shebang. By the end of this, you'll know exactly what makes these things tick. So picture this, a board about the size of a placemat, covered in lines and dotted with all sorts of components. The most prominent thing you usually see is this big metal block right in the center.
Ah, the heat sink. Absolutely crucial.
Yeah, what's the deal with that? Keeps things from melting down.
Exactly. It's all about heat dissipation. See, the CPU, the brain of your computer, generates a ton of heat. The heat sink draws that heat away, preventing catastrophic meltdowns.
Makes sense. So it's like a high-tech radiator for your computer's brain.
You got it. And the metal used, usually aluminum or copper, is chosen for its excellent heat conductivity.
So no computer brain freeze with a good heatsink on the job.
Speaking of the CPU, this particular motherboard we're looking at has a pretty low power one. Is that why I'm not seeing a fan on this heatsink?
Bingo! Lower power means less heat generated. Sometimes a well-designed heatsink is enough to keep things cool, especially for everyday computing needs.
So it's like choosing the right engine for your car city driving versus the racetrack. Different needs, different cooling solutions.
Perfect analogy. Now let's move on to something close to my heart. Memory. You see these slots right next to the CPU. That's where your RAM goes.
RAM. I'm always curious about that. What's the deal with RAM? How does it actually work?
Think of RAM as your computer's short-term memory. It stores data that the CPU needs to access super quickly. So the more RAM, the faster my computer can process information.
Precisely. More RAM means smoother multitasking, faster loading times, the whole 9 yards. Ever had a bunch of programs open and your computer starts to crawl?
Yeah, all the time.
That, my friend, is often a sign that your RAM is maxed out. You're asking it to juggle too much at once.
So more RAM, smoother sailing. Got it. Okay, what about this longer slot down here? It says PCIe. That sounds important.
It is. PCIe, or Peripheral Component Interconnect Express, is how your computer talks to its high-speed peripherals.
Peripherals, like my printer and stuff.
Not just printers. Think graphics cards, high-speed storage drives, network adapters, the heavy hitters.
Ah, so this is the fast lane for data. What makes it so special?
It's all about that direct connection to the CPU. Data bypasses any potential bottlenecks, leading to lightning-fast speeds. For things like gaming or video editing, it's a game changer.
So if I'm a casual user not really into gaming or anything, do I still need to worry about this PCIe slot?
Not necessarily. Many computers, especially those designed for everyday tasks, come with something called integrated graphics.
Integrated graphics.
It means the graphics processing unit is built directly into the CPU or sometimes the motherboard itself.
So it's like having a two-in-one. Efficient.
Precisely. Yeah. For everyday tasks like browsing, working on documents, even streaming videos, integrated graphics are usually more than enough.
Love it when things just work. Okay, enough about the guts. Let's talk about the part of the motherboard we actually interact with, all those ports along the edge. Yeah. We've got USB, HDMI, Ethernet. It's like Grand Central Station over here.
It is. And each one of those ports plays a crucial role in connecting your computer to the outside world.
Well, let's break it down, starting with USB. I feel like I've used USB for everything under the sun.
Rightfully so. USB has become the universal standard for connecting peripherals, keyboards, mice, external drives, printers, even charging your phone. The list goes on.
And then there's HDMI. Pretty much the gold standard for connecting to monitors and TVs these days, right?
Exactly. HDMI transmits both audio and video signals over a single cable, making it super convenient. It's really streamlined home entertainment setups.
Or what about Ethernet? With Wi-Fi everywhere, is Ethernet still relevant?
While Wi-Fi is undeniably convenient, a wired Ethernet connection still reigns supreme for speed and stability.
Right. When you need that rock-solid connection, nothing beats a cable. Okay, so we've covered the communication hubs. Now I'm curious about something a little more mysterious. That little silver button cell battery tucked away in the corner. What's that all about?
Ah, the humble clock battery. Easy to overlook, but it plays a crucial role.
Yeah, it just keeps the clock ticking.
Right, it's part of it. It powers the real-time clock, which keeps track of the date and time even when your computer's completely unplugged.
Really? I always figured the computer just, like, internally remembered that information somehow.
It does, but it needs a little help from the real-time clock. It ensures your files are time-stamped correctly, schedules tasks, even plays a role in system updates. It's a silent workhorse, ensuring everything runs smoothly behind the scenes.
Wow. Never knew such a tiny battery could have such a big job. It really is amazing how much goes on behind the scenes that we never even think about. Like this clock battery keeping everything in sync. It's tiny but mighty.
Absolutely. And speaking of tiny, have you ever really looked at how many components are crammed onto a motherboard? It's mind-boggling.
It really is, like a miniature city. And it makes you wonder, how do they even make these things?
Well, it's a far cry from the early days of computing. I mean, those old computers were massive, right? Took up entire rooms.
Yeah, I've seen pictures, like something out of a science fiction movie.
Exactly. And their motherboards were equally gigantic. Most of the components back then were assembled by hand.
Really? Wow, talk about a meticulous job.
Oh, absolutely. But things have changed drastically since then. The miniaturization of electronics is really a testament to breakthroughs in manufacturing.
So how do they do it? How do you fit so much onto something so small?
Automation, robotics, it's all about precision. They use something called surface mount technology, where components are placed and soldered directly onto the board by machines.
So no more hand soldering each tiny part.
Not for mass-produced motherboards. It's all about speed and efficiency these days. Those machines can place components with incredible accuracy, much faster than any human could.
That's amazing. But it also makes me wonder, what happens if something breaks? Can you even repair them anymore?
That's the trade-off with miniaturization. It makes repairs significantly more challenging. In the past, you could often swap out a faulty capacitor or resistor, but with surface mount components, it's a whole different ballgame.
Because everything is like glued down.
Essentially, they're soldered directly to the board, and those connections are incredibly delicate. One wrong move, and you could end up doing more harm than good.
So it's less about DIY repairs these days and more about finding an expert.
Pretty much, although there are still some skilled technicians out there who specialize in microsoldering and can work wonders. But for the average person, if a motherboard fails, it's often more cost-effective to replace it.
That makes sense. Well, I guess all good things must come to an end, even motherboards. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, let's shift our focus from the motherboard itself to the thing that gives it life, the power supply.
Ah, yes, the unsung hero of the computer world.
Tucked away in the corner, quietly doing its thing. So what's the deal with the power supply? I mean, I know it provides power, but what does that actually mean?
Well, at its most basic level, the power supply unit, or PSU, takes the AC power from your wall outlet and converts it to DC power that your computer can use.
AC to DC, so it's like a translator for electricity.
You could say that. The electricity coming from your wall outlet is alternating current, or AC, while your computer components run on direct current, or DC. The PSU acts as the intermediary, converting one to the other.
Okay, that makes sense. But it's not just about blindly pumping electricity into the motherboard, right? There's got to be some finesse involved.
Absolutely. Different components have different power requirements. They need different voltages and amperages to function correctly.
Okay, so this is where I get a little lost. Voltages, amperages. Can you break it down for those of us who aren't electrical engineers?
Sure. Think of it like water pressure. You wouldn't want to water delicate flowers with a fire hose, right? They need a gentle spray. Similarly, different components in your computer need different levels of electrical pressure to operate properly.
Okay, so the PSU is like the pressure regulator, making sure everything gets the right amount of juice.
Exactly. It ensures that the power delivery is stable and safe, protecting your components from damage.
So what happens if the PSU fails? Is that bad news?
It can be. A failing PSU can sometimes damage other components if it doesn't shut down properly. That's why it's so important to choose a quality PSU, especially if you're building your own computer.
So what should people look for in a PSU?
The most important factor is wattage. That's a measure of how much power the PSU can deliver. You need to make sure it can handle the demands of all the components in your system.
So more powerful components equal a higher wattage PSU.
Exactly. If you've got a high-end graphics card and a power-hungry processor, you'll need a PSU with a higher wattage rating than someone who's just using their computer for basic tasks like browsing the web or working on documents.
Makes sense. It's all about finding that balance between power and efficiency. You don't want to go overboard, but you also don't want to come up short.
Precisely. It's always a good idea to do your research and choose a PSU that's a good fit for your specific needs.
Great advice. Well, we've covered a lot of ground here, from the tiniest components to the power behind it all. We've talked a lot about the nuts and bolts of motherboards, but I want to shift gears a bit now. We've been comparing these boards to cities with all their intricate connections and components.
Right, like bustling hubs of activity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But they're also kind of like blank canvases, aren't they? Just waiting for someone to come along and unlock their potential.
That's a really interesting way to think about it, and it's true. Every motherboard has so much possibility baked into it.
Right. So let's say you could build your dream computer. What would its motherboard look like? What would be your top priorities?
Oh, that's a fun one. Hmm. Well, if I could have anything, I'd probably go all out on processing power. Like the latest multi-core CPU, something that can handle anything I throw at it.
Yeah, got to have that horsepower. What about storage? Would you go for speed or capacity?
Both. I'd want a lightning-fast NVMe drive for my operating system and frequently used programs, but also a terabyte or two of traditional storage for everything else.
Makes sense. You know, it's funny, we've been talking about motherboards as if they're these fixed, unchanging things, but technology is always evolving.
Mm.
What do you think the future holds for motherboards?
Oh man, who knows? That's what's so exciting about this field. Things change so quickly. We might be talking about quantum computing motherboards one day.
Quantum computing. Now you're just messing with me.
I'm serious, it's on the horizon. Or maybe motherboards will become even more integrated into our lives. Imagine a motherboard embedded in your desk or even in your clothing.
Okay, now you're just getting carried away.
Hey, anything is possible. But in all seriousness, I think we'll continue to see motherboards become more powerful, more efficient, and more integrated into our daily lives.
Well said. It's been quite a journey exploring the world of motherboards. We've learned about their history, their inner workings, and even pondered their future.
It's been fun.
It really has. And for all of you listening, we hope you've gained a newfound appreciation for this often overlooked, but absolutely essential component, because without the motherboard, there is no computer. So the next time you fire up your laptop or boot up your desktop, take a moment to think about all the magic happening on that little green board inside. It's a marvel of engineering, and it's what makes our digital world possible. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll catch you next time.